Hello, my name is Dr. Beth Falls, and I'm happy to have the opportunity to introduce you to the second in a series of two courses on public health analytical methods, or research methods for short. What I wanted to do in this first introductory lecture is just talk a little bit about some basic concepts related to public health research, and then give you a lay of the land for what you can expect over the next 16 weeks in this course. So when we talk about research, the definition that I like, the simple definition, is the creative and systematic work undertaken to establish new facts and reach new conclusions. So the key words here are systematic and creative. So we're doing research informally all the time, just trying to figure things out. So I like to use cartoons to kind of illustrate some of the concepts. Rubbing sticks together, you can just do it for fun, or you can make fire. And then when you make fire, that can become research. The difference is what you do ahead of time. It becomes research when it's systematic. And research is always creative because you're always trying to establish something new. I have been doing research for over 30 years and I still love it. I think it is the most fun thing you could possibly do in your life, and the fact that I get to do it for my career is just a bonus. So when we talk about research, you can break it down into two broad categories: basic and applied research. And the difference is that basic research is when the goal is to simply create new knowledge, to establish new facts. And basic research is extraordinarily important. It's the backbone on which everything else, all other research, is built. But the difference between basic research and applied research is that applied research, the goal isn't simply to gain more knowledge, it's to solve a problem. So when we talk about public health research, we're doing applied research. We see a problem related to public health and we want to find a solution. And in my opinion, applied research is extraordinarily fun because it's super fun to solve problems, especially really, really relevant problems in our field of public health. So thinking about who does public health research, for the most part, it's split between people who work for government agencies and academic institutions. So when we talk about public health, primarily we're talking about the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, as well as state and local health departments. But there are also people doing public health research in some of the different other government agencies. And then much of public health research is done at academic institutions. However, there are also people doing public health research in both nonprofit and for-profit organizations. And then I think the most underrated place that public health research is done and should be done more is actually in the field, in the people who are on the front lines of public health. So incorporating more research in the careers of public health professionals, I think, is extraordinarily important to solve some of the most important problems that we're facing in public health right now. So that's why I'm excited about teaching you guys about research. Because when we think about why you're learning about research, the main reason is that you, regardless of what you do in the field of public health, you need to understand how research is done. You need to be able to distinguish between good and not so good research so that you can apply what the research of others into your practice in public health. However, I also hope some of you at least will get excited about research and look for ways that you can actually become researchers and incorporate research into your public health profession. And then just learning about research, the research methods, that creative and systematic approach in which research is done, you can apply that same approach to many other aspects of your public health practice. So going over just some of the kind of fundamentals of research. The main two types of data that are collected in research is quantitative and qualitative. And we're going to talk a lot about this throughout the course. students often get confused on how to distinguish between quantitative and qualitative. And in my mind, the simplest way to think about it is that if the data is expressed numerically, then it's quantitative. And so a lot of times students think that if you collect data through a survey, it's qualitative, but that's not the case. If the survey provides data that you actually have represent with numbers, then it's still quantitative. So again, we'll go into great detail about this throughout this course. And then the two main ways that research designs are done is you can either do observational, and observational is just what it sounds like. You just are observing something. You're collecting data by seeing what's already happening. And then the opposite of that is experimental. Experimental is when you have an intervention where you actually give a treatment, or you design some sort of protocol that your subjects follow. That's experimental research. Again, we'll go into great detail on these specific types of observational and experimental research designs throughout the course. Then the other thing I think is important to know up front is the different types of research in respect to primary, secondary, and tertiary. Primary research is when a researcher collects new data. So when you design a study, you go out and you either do an observational or experimental study, and you gather new data to analyze. That's primary research. Secondary research is when a researcher analyzes already existing data. And this, again, is really important for public health professionals to understand, because there's a ton of secondary data that's available to us that we can analyze to answer research questions. The government does a number of ongoing surveillance studies where the data is available to anyone. It's publicly available. And then other researchers do big research studies, and they make their data open source and available. So another researcher may want to look at the data in a different way to answer a different question than the original primary research study. And then the other way secondary data can be gathered is through things like health records. And the newest way secondary data is gathered is through social media. And that's something we're going to dig into a little later in the course. And then the third layer of research is tertiary. And tertiary is when it's basically what we call a meta-analysis, where a researcher takes all of the research that's done and published on a particular topic, and they combine it, and they combine data sets to kind of come up with a consensus of the current knowledge in that field. So those are the three kind of layers of research. They're all extraordinarily important in public health. And then just to begin to set the stage of the research protocols, again, we're going to dig into these in great detail. But the thing that makes research is the rigor. So you have to be very, very careful, thoughtful, consistent when you do research, and then the reproducibility. So if you complete a research study, another researcher should be able to come in and do exactly what you did and get the same results. So the flow of research, again, that we're going to be following throughout the next 16 weeks is a research question, study design, data collection, analysis of data, and reporting of data. So that's how we're going to follow through the course. And then there is a final step in this that we just didn't have time to go into great detail in this course, but I don't want to completely skip it, and that is evaluation. So whenever a researcher does a research study, they always want to end with a really rigorous evaluation, looking at what worked, what didn't work, where some problems came up, what might have introduced bias. All those types of things need to be evaluated at the end of each research study. And that's what makes research improve over time. And that's what we talk about also when we talk about rigor. So let's just talk about the next 16 weeks, just so you know where you're going to be going. This week is an introductory week. We're going to be thinking about these bigger concepts. We're going to meet each other, and we're going to kind of reflect on what you guys learned in 610 and how that's going to carry over into 630. And then the next 3 weeks, weeks 2 to 4, you are going to work on developing a research question. So that seems a little bit much, right? 3 weeks to develop a research question, but that's because it's not a trivial undertaking. The research question is the most important part of a research study. If you don't have a good question, a well-developed research question, your study, it doesn't matter how hard you work on your study, it's not going to give you good results. So there is a famous quote I like from Einstein that says, if I had an hour to solve a problem, I would spend 55 minutes thinking about the problem and 5 minutes thinking about the solution. So that's kind of how I think when I think about the research question. If you are going to put effort into doing research, you've got to put the lion's share of that effort into developing a research question. And so that's what you're going to do. It's a 3-step process, and we're going to walk through that in weeks 2, 3, and 4. And then in week 5, you're going to dig into some great detail on ethics in human research. And the reason for this is because there's been a lot of unethical research done in the past when it comes to public health and health-related research using humans as a subject. So you're going to learn about that, learn how research has to be done in order to use human subjects, and you're also going to actually get a certification so that you will be certified to conduct human public health research using human subjects. We're then going to move into quantitative and qualitative research. So this is the kind of core of the course. This is going to be half of the course, 8 weeks. We're going to look at research design, data collection, and data analysis for both quantitative and qualitative research. And then talk about how we communicate the results of that research. And this is a really important area for public health, because traditionally when we think about basic science, the communication is sort of just a brief thought at the end of completing the research. It's always done the same way. You write a paper, you submit it for peer review, it gets published, and then researchers move on to their next research study. But because in public health we're doing applied research, we need to go beyond just publishing the research. We need to look for ways to actually turn our research into action. And that's what we're going to talk about in weeks 14 and 15, and you're going to be doing some practice in that. And then finally, we're going to finish in week 16 talking about how research is funded, which again is essential, right? So you could have the best, most important research question in the world. You can develop the most rigorous, creative research study, but if you can't secure funding to carry it out, you're kind of dead in the water. So we're going to talk a little bit about research funding, where research funding comes from, and tie some of those ethical issues into who we should and should not take funding for to do public health research. So I'm super excited to get started on the course. I hope you are too.